good evening, and welcome to each and every one of you. I'm Clayton Rose, the president of Bowdoin College. My first thought is, finally. This moment, that's an inside joke, but I'll explain it. This moment, this celebration, this opportunity to honor Ken has been a long time in the making. It was October of 2019 that our Committee on Honors at Bowdoin College made the decision to bestow upon Ken the Bowdoin Prize. We had a conversation in the early part of 2020 about when we might have it, focused on the fall. As Steinbeck said, the best laid plans of mice and men. So here we are, 3 years later. And I could not be more pleased that we are here, finally. I'd like to take just a moment to recognize a couple of folks. Ken's wife, Kathy, is here. Welcome. His sons, Ken Jr. and Kevin. And his brothers, Arthur and Stephen, are here with us as well. So, as are so many of Ken's friends, and we are so pleased to welcome all of you to Bowdoin College. I'd also like to acknowledge Joni Benoit Samuelson, class of 1979. Joni was awarded the Bowdoin Prize in 1985, a year after her electrifying gold medal victory in the first women's Olympic marathon at the Los Angeles Games. Joni's a current trustee of the college, and last May was an honorary degree recipient, and you are, Joni, an inspiration to us all. Also joining us this evening is Karen Gordon Mills, another Bowdoin honoram, and the partner, and I would say much better half, of my predecessor and Bowdoin's 14th president, Barry Mills. Barry could not be with us this evening, but I know, Ken, that he's been in touch with you and he sends his regrets. Karen served as the administrator to the U.S. Small Business Administration and a member of the President's Council, National Economic Council in the Obama White House, and currently serves with Ken on the Harvard Corporation. Joni and Karen, thank you for everything that you do for Bowdoin, and thank you for being here this evening. Now, many of our trustees of the college are here. Our board chair, Scott Perper, class of 78, will join me on stage later in the evening to present Ken with the Bowdoin Prize. And there are many leaders and members of the Bowdoin College Black Alumni Association that are here tonight, and I want to thank each of you for all that you do for the college. The Bowdoin Prize is the highest honor awarded by Bowdoin. It's given no more than once every 5 years in recognition of, quote, the most distinctive contribution in any field of endeavor. And the committee of award, and if you're interested in the history, that's what we have cocktails for later. The committee of award consists of the college president and the board chair, the chief justice of the Maine Supreme Judicial Court, and the presidents of Harvard and Yale universities. It was established in 1928 as a memorial to William John Curtis, class of 1875, by his widow Lena and their children. Curtis was a Brunswick native, a prominent lawyer, a partner at Sullivan and Cromwell, a generous benefactor both to Bowdoin and to his hometown. When he died in October of 1927, he was so revered in Brunswick that all of the places of business in town closed for his funeral. And as the New York Alumni Association said of him at the time, he loved the college deeply, he believed in it profoundly, he looked forward to its future with confidence, and he gave time, energy, and money with unstinted generosity to its service. His gifts to Bowdoin included the class of 1875 Gate and the class of 1875 Prize in American History, and to the town he donated the money that made the public library possible. I also want to share with you information about William Curtis's father, Captain John Curtis, that came into my possession in the last week or so. While it was hiding in plain sight, this was not something that, to the best of our knowledge, has been previously discussed or explored. And it is particularly meaningful in the context of a history project that is currently ongoing at Bowdoin. This project is examining our history with respect to the Black and Indigenous communities and will help us to create a more complete and complex history of the college. The first phase, and I expect that there will be work and discussions that will be ongoing for many years, will be completed and made available to the Bowdoin community sometime in the spring. And as you likely all know, work like this has been going on at many colleges and universities in our country, including Amherst, Brown, Georgetown, Harvard, Yale, Hopkins, Washington and Lee, among many others. It is widely known, though until recently almost never part of the common historical narrative, that slavery and industries associated with slavery were a vital part of the New England economy in the 17th, 18th, and for most of the 19th century, and that prominent people in New England communities accrued substantial wealth and power through these industries and their direct ties to slavery. Among these were well-known ship captains in Maine, including our benefactor's father, Captain John Curtis, a ship owner and a merchant seaman who frequently transported cotton from Mobile, Alabama to England in the years leading up to the Civil War. His son, our graduate William Curtis, was certainly successful in his own right, but through the station in life into which he was born, the privileges that accrued to him as a result, and very likely through inheritance, John Curtis directly and powerfully benefited from his father's deep ties to slavery. Now, why do I raise this as we gather on this joyous occasion to celebrate Ken Chenault? And to that question, I offer the following. Because it is a real and important part of our past and who we are, and one closely connected to this prize. And like other significant parts of our history that have been ignored and never discussed, this is something that we need to acknowledge, to shed light upon, and to add to the reality of our history. We only remain a great educational institution if we live up to our obligation to seek truth, to provide as complete an understanding of ourselves as we can, to acknowledge and to engage our history, and to allow it to inform and shape our future. And in fact, Ken has lived this ethos for a very long time. Some of you may know that his honors thesis at Bowdoin was a history of the experience of black men at the college, a history that revealed both very difficult truths as well as incredible courage and accomplishment. A final note. The Bowdoin Prize comes with a modest cash award, endowed by the Curtis family. Ken let us know that he'd like the college to donate these funds on his behalf to the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. An institution established with his incredible involvement and support in 2003, and as I think you all agree, cannot think of a more fitting use for this money. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce and to thank Darren Walker, president of the Ford Foundation and Ken's great friend, who will lead the conversation that we are about to hear. You all know much about Darren, I suspect. He is no stranger to Bowdoin. He was our baccalaureate speaker and honorary degree recipient in 2016, and who more recently shared with our trustees his unique insights, perspective, and deep understanding of the issues that face our country. We are deeply grateful to you, Darren, for being here this evening and to leading this conversation and to helping us to honor Ken. We are in for a huge treat. Darren, Ken, the stage is yours.
Well, my friend, here we are.
We are here.
Ken Chenault, an exalted, admired, successful executive. Indeed, when you led American Express, you were repeatedly named among the CEOs of American companies who were most admired. American Express itself was always on the list of the best places to work. Your leadership in the wake of 9/11 in making a commitment first to return to Lower Manhattan was a singular, bold, I think, step in helping to save New York in the wake of that horrific moment. And there is no doubt that much of your success is due to your family, your parents who were deeply invested in your success and that of your siblings. And of course, you married an extraordinary woman in Catherine Chenault, and I think those of us who know her would give
Above
her
my station.
a lot of credit. But Bowdoin was a very important part of your development. So Clayton referenced the paper you did, which I'm sure was the first of its kind at Bowdoin. But take us back to your arrival in 1970.
So I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to go to Bowdoin, and I was, until my sophomore year in high school, was a relatively indifferent student. And I had a great interest in sports, and I went to Springfield College because they had a really terrific soccer team, and I wanted also to play basketball. And then after my first semester, where I did pretty well, I decided I wanted to have more of an academic environment. And the headmaster of the school that I went to, the Waldorf School in Garden City, Long Island, was a fellow by the name of Peter Curran. And Peter was also a historian and someone who had talked to me incessantly about the need to wake up. And he would say, I think you have a lot of talent, but you've got to apply yourself. And you've got to be more disciplined. And what was interesting in the experience, I went to, obviously, going to school in the late 60s and the early 70s was the height of the Vietnam War protests, the Black Power movement. And I was with a group of students at Springfield College. There were 56 of us that took over a dormitory. And I was actually suspended for...
Kenneth Chenault was
Yes,
suspended from school?
I was suspended. And
This is a first.
That's right.
I don't think people know this.
And I was let back in, and Peter Curran came up and brought me up for interviews at Bowdoin. He said, I think Bowdoin would be a terrific place. And it's also a place where you can really apply yourself. And a little vignette is there was a person by the name of Dick Mole, who was really a very innovative head of admissions. He really did a terrific job at Bowdoin. And Dick told me, I guess it was my junior year, and I'd done very well academically, and he said, you should know, the dean of students at Springfield wrote me a note and said, you should rescind your admission of Ken Chenault.
Because you were such a militant.
Yeah, obviously I shared with them what I did and why I did it, why I participated. But Bowdoin was really a place where I found myself. And my class was probably the first class where you had a sizable black population at the school, and it was a very cohesive group. The professors and the coaches, I did play soccer at Bowdoin, and I ran track, and I still enjoyed sports, but I made incredibly close friendships with my professors. It was just an incredible experience where I really grew in to myself. And I really credit the Bowdoin community, the faculty, my coaches, the students that I met, clearly the black students that I was friendly with, but it really shaped me.
And so in many ways, it sounds like Bowdoin prepared you for the next big step, because of course you didn't go on to Harvard Law School.
Yeah, and what's interesting, what I will say is when I was at Bowdoin, I didn't have any interest in business. Didn't have any role models that were in business. And I actually went to law school because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I thought I might be a civil rights lawyer, or I thought I might be a history professor. And I was very serious after my first year that I thought I might apply for a PhD in history.
And history, why history?
American history, because I've always loved history, Darren. It's the lessons, the individuals. I just had a deep attraction. But then I also realized I just didn't have the temperament to be a professor. And the Harvard Law School experience was a equally shaping experience for me. And as with Bowdoin, some of my close friends I have from Bowdoin and I have from Harvard Law School. And what I think was important for me at Harvard Law School is one of the things that I recognized is that I could compete with anybody. And that did a lot for my confidence, and I also enjoyed the challenge.
Well, obviously, you were an exemplary student at Bowdoin, so Bowdoin gave you confidence. I mean, obviously,
absolutely,
if you could do well at Bowdoin, you could do well at Harvard Law School.
No doubt.
And so,
but I was still nervous that first year. Let's be clear.
But of course, as always, you did well. And I'm curious you make the transition from law. You come to New York, you go into consulting, you find your way because people see you and see the talent in you on the fast track, it seems, at American Express.
So the transition from law, I actually practiced law for 2 years, and a friend of mine was at Bain & Company, which obviously is now a very well-known consulting firm, but Bain was maybe 4 years in existence. And what was exciting to me at the time, I would not have phrased it this way, but it was like being with a startup. And the people were really energized. There was a lot of passion. You could tell these are people that were really on the move. And one of the things that I had started to think about was the last sort of civil rights frontier was business. And I was attracted to that it was important for blacks to move in the business world so that in fact we could have more control over our destiny. And that was important to me.
Well, because you understood that there was a difference between having political power and capital.
Right.
And that in a capitalist system, you can have all the political power you want, but if you don't have capital, you don't really have power.
Absolutely right.
And so for you, the issue of power and control over your own destiny, if you will, was clearly a driver, and you were clearly ambitious, which for a black man of your generation to be very comfortable being in an environment where you are competing primarily with white men. How did that play, Ken Chenault? I can only imagine.
So I think, probably one, I would credit my parents because they were terrific role models for me. And they also exposed me and my brothers and sister to to other blacks who were successful, and they talked about their history and also talked about our family history, and that was important. And I think from a business standpoint, and maybe some of it was I was used to competition in sports, but I was not intimidated. I really didn't feel that I was inferior. Didn't necessarily think I was superior, but I thought that I was a very hard worker. I was willing to take risks, calculated risks. Over time, certainly from my consulting background, strategy became really important, and I loved it. And I loved being, one of my mentors is Lou Gerstner, who was credited for the turnaround of IBM in the 90s. And one of the things he said when he hired me, which I always use this phrase, which I've pirated from him, is he said, "I want you to be a catalytic agent of change." And that's how I viewed myself, is to be an agent of change, whether it was in business or making social change.
And so I would be really interested in your talking about that trajectory, the arc from when you were made president and then you moved in to be CEO and chairman of American Express. So what was the day like when you learned that you would be the chairman and CEO of American Express?
So I'll tell one vignette and then give you an idea about that day, because obviously it was an incredible day. But I think what was important is I was offered the job of president of the company twice. The first time I turned it down.
Why?
Because I didn't like the reporting relationship. So the CEO at the time said, let's do joint reporting. We'll have all the businesses report in together. And I said, no, that doesn't work for me. And he said, but I'm about to go to the board and I'm all set tomorrow morning. And I said, well, you're going to have to tell them that if I'm going to be president, I want to be chief operating officer. And that happened 2 months later. The next thing was, and then we, in fact, Harvey Golub, we had a very constructive, good relationship. And one of the things I've always believed, I always use this term, constructive confrontation. Do it respectfully, but at the end of the day, sometimes you got to confront the issues. And the day that I was officially named and it was public, I clearly thought of my father who'd passed away when he was 80, and he saw some of my rise, but not when I became president. And I thought of him, and I obviously was glad to tell my mother, and she was obviously.
What was her response?
She's a very understated person, and her comment to me was, "That's nice, Ken." Now, she told a lot of the neighbors and friends about it, but that's what she said to me. And one of the really precious moments for me was when the board voted to make me CEO. And Vernon Jordan, who was a mentor to both of us and was just a great mentor to me, he passed a note. So the boardroom had a circular table. And I see all of a sudden they're passing this note from one board member to another board member, but no one opens up the note. And then it's handed to me. And the note read from Vernon Jordan. It said, "If I was in church, I would say hallelujah." And no one opened the note for me. And that was Vernon. And I said, I said to Vernon after the meeting, I said, it's unbelievable that no one opened the note. And he said, yeah, I think if I'd said hallelujah, I think I would have scared a lot of people.
So did things just immediately change for you?
So one of the things, Darren, I think that's very important, and we've talked about this, that I believe in very strongly, is most successions are not done well. And what was really important in the succession that I had with Harvey is that one of the things I said to Harvey was, we got to go away for 2 or 3 days, and let's talk through how we really organize succession. And what I want to talk about are not just the concrete things that we're going to do, but the feelings that you're going to have, right? Because I'm taking over. I'm going to do it in a very respectful way, but we got to be real clear about what happens. And so things were really organized very well. And however, when you're president, chief operating officer, that prepares you to an extent. But as you know, when you're the only person in that seat, it's very different.
Was it lonely and isolating?
It's lonely. It's isolating because, I really value the relationships that I have in any organization. But at the end of the day, as the boss, you can have a close relationship, but you also have to keep some distance. And having that balance is really important. And then understanding what are the issues where you need to be totally involved. What are the areas that you need to delegate? How do you set priorities? And then, as you know, all the best laid plans, things happen in the world, and you've got to deal with it.
Like 9/11.
Like 9/11.
So talk about 9/11, where you were
Yeah.
the ensuing weeks.
So I was in Salt Lake City, and I should say what was really an unbelievable experience. Obviously, some of you may have had people who were impacted by what happened on 9/11, but we lost 11 of our colleagues. And I was actually in my hotel room, and I was on a conference call with some of the top management at Amex, and then I heard screams. Then I turned on, I had the TV on, and then I heard, a plane had hit the North Tower. And so literally, people had, the Amex building was right across the street from the World Trade Center. So we had to evacuate. I couldn't leave Salt Lake City for 2 days, even though we had the company plane. And so we had to charter a plane, get approval from the Secretary of Transportation, so that I could fly back. But I was 2 days just by myself. And I had, obviously, our employees. We had around 3,000 employees in Salt Lake City. And so I was there with them, and I had a town hall. But I was also, obviously, talking to our top people. And so one of the things that I did that I think was very important was, and I think it's critical in a crisis, is to understand what are the core priorities. So the core priorities for me were, one, safety and security of our people. And so I said, I want to find out where every single person is in the company all over the world. That's really important. And I want, as much as possible, to in fact get in touch with family members and let them know. Because there were a number of employees where people didn't know. For
you were
several
calling
hours.
family members?
I wasn't. I was having our people call them. What I did, Darren, is when I found out that we had lost 11 of our people, one is I made sure that we were offering services and help. But I came back, and it was around probably 3 in the morning, Kathy, I think. I went in, I remember around 7 in the morning, and we had 8,000 people in the tower, and I see one of my colleagues, Tom Schick, who ran public affairs at the time, was incredibly helpful. But one of the things that was important about that was giving people some comfort. And I remember we were in a place in Hudson, New Jersey, right across the river. And I got up on a desk, and there were several hundred people, and I just talked to them extemporaneously. But then around, I guess it was 2 weeks later, I said, I've got to connect to people. And I would say one other thing that I did in safety and security was, one, very practically, is to say we're going to have to find space. So let's find space. And I won't tell you the stories of some of the real estate folks getting the space. There were some good stories of people who were really helpful, and there were some bad stories of people who were not. But I think what was critical to me was we got employees together from the tri-state area, and I think it was close to 10,000 people in Madison Square Garden. And I just decided I couldn't speak from a script. I just wanted to speak from the heart and to tell people when I cared about them, that I wanted to also give them some hope. I talked about some of the challenges we had, but why I felt that American Express would overcome those challenges. Now, what was important is our people were emotionally traumatized. Analysts were saying that our company was in serious problems.
People were going to stop using
People were
those
going to stop
credit
using the
cards.
card. People were going to stop traveling.
Right.
In a set of issues, and this was also the early days of the internet, and so there were a whole set of issues that really had hit the company, and I decided that we had to take some decisive action. And this is one of my tenets of leadership: is you've got to be both decisive and compassionate. And the decisive part, which was very, very tough, was to decide that we were basically going to have to cut 15% of our workforce, which is incredibly painful. And I not only went out, but I had every senior person speak in person to people to talk to them about the context of what we were facing, the loss of the company. That was very important, the loss of lives, and the game plan of how we were going to come back. And one of the things that my predecessor had instituted, which I think was really important, is we did something called an employee survey. But the difference with our employee survey is that a percentage of your compensation was tied to that survey. And we really did see causality between employee satisfaction, customer satisfaction, and obviously financial performance. And my senior team said, some of them said, we shouldn't do the survey because of what you've decided to do. And I said, no, we're going to do the survey because we're all accountable. And we ended up getting very high scores, not that people liked being laid off, because we surveyed people who were also being laid off, but because of the way we did it, and obviously the context of the environment. So I think what sometimes gets confused is people say, if you're compassionate, you're weak, and if you're decisive, you're hard. And a leader has to be decisive, and they have to be compassionate. And because at the end of the day, if you want to be an enduring leader, then you have to have both of those qualities.
Well, and the other thing that you, of course, did, and Mike Bloomberg credits you, because as a new mayor, he was dealing with the aftermath and the business community. And you were the first of the major CEOs downtown to also step up at the same time you were doing this, to say American Express is not leaving New York, we're not leaving Lower Manhattan, and we remain committed to the city. And so in some ways you were following the playbook of the great American, certainly the great New York City CEOs, the Walter Ristas, the Bill Paleys, the David Rockefellers, who during a prior generation had said, we're not leaving New York, even though everyone says New York is going to hell in a handbasket. And yet you stood up and put the company's capital on the line, because clearly that was a big commitment, and both emotional and financial. But speaking of financial capital, before we pivot, I do want you to talk about America's most famous investor, who was a steadfast investor in American Express and a believer in your leadership, and that is Warren Buffett. So talk a little bit about that relationship and the partnership you had with him as a very significant shareholder in Berkshire Hathaway in your company.
So Warren and I have become close friends, and I'm on the board of Berkshire Hathaway, and he's been incredible. I'll tell you, my first meeting, I was very concerned with my first meeting because a lot of people focus on what I did at 9/11 and the financial crisis, but in fact, my first leadership test was, there was a unit of the company, it was the one unit that I had not run before, but they invested over a 5 or 6 year period in high yield bonds. I won't go into all the detail, but the reality is, I'm looking at Gilahi because he can help me out on some of this. But the reality is that we took too much risk. And I decided that we should write it off. And at that time, writing off $1.7 billion was a lot.
It was material by SEC standards.
It was definitely material. And so I had not met Warren before. So I think Tom Schicks remembers this. I did this interview with the Wall Street Journal, and it was all about, what happened. And the reporter asked me something to the effect, did you know what you were doing? And I said, no, we didn't know what we were doing. And I said, but I'm accountable. And what was interesting about that is literally 2 days later, I go to see Warren, and I'm saying, geez, I'm on the plane, and this is really going to be really tough. And so I walk in, and I said, Warren, not the way I wanted to start off our relationship. I apologize, I'm accountable. And Warren said, sit down. He said, I really liked the interview in the Wall Street Journal. He said, for 2 reasons. One is you took accountability, and it really wasn't on your watch, and you never mentioned your predecessor. You just said, I'm 100% accountable. And he said, second is you were honest. And then he said, actually, third is, if you said you knew what you were doing, I would say you're a crook. So that was the start of my relationship with Warren, and he was there at every critical moment, people would sometimes say to me, what do you talk about? We talked about everything. We talked about not just business, but life, our families, what we believed in. I remember with Warren, we were, not to drop names, we were at Bill Gates' house.
Of course,
and as Bill has one of the largest collections of original manuscripts. Mm-hmm. And Warren walks over and he pulls out this speech and he starts reading it to me and he starts crying. And it was a speech that Martin Luther King delivered at Grinnell College, and Warren was on the board of Grinnell. And he said he met Martin Luther King through Susie.
Susie, yes,
His
because
wife,
she was a Grinnell graduate.
who passed
Yes.
away, and you know, it was just an incredible. It's an incredible relationship, and you know, I always, no matter what happened, you know, I would call Warren and say, "Warren, how you doing?" He'd say, "Never been better." Almost every time, except at the beginning of the pandemic. And he said, "I'm doing okay, but this is really crazy. I don't know what's going to happen."
So you leave American Express, you become chairman of one of the country's most successful venture capital firms, General Catalyst, and you really take on some tough issues. So let's talk about you and your very good friend Ken Frazier led an effort to help the country understand what was happening in Georgia and in some other states, but why particularly in the moment when the legislation was being debated and calls for chief executives to step forward, and you and Ken organized an unprecedented mobilization of black leaders, and not only black leaders, but you signed up dozens of white CEOs and corporate executives. Why was that necessary?
So I think first what's important is that Ken and I were not the sole leaders of the effort. Bill Lewis, who is here, Charles Phillips, Clarence Otis, and a number of people in the audience were involved. You were involved, Darren,
I was signing something
in this effort.
It was really
But-
a lot of work.
But here's what's really important to me, and I think I can speak for all the signatories. We actually literally got over 700 signatories. But in the beginning, I would say everyone who coalesced around this effort, one, believed strongly in America and strongly in our democracy. And I think that's what's very important is, you know, there's a famous former judge who actually, Richard Ludig, who I think had more clerks who clerked for him, clerking for Judge Scalia. So he is an arch conservative.
Absolutely.
But one of the things he said about the democracy and January 6th was that democracy was on knife's edge. And if we think about our democracy and the values of this country, we've got to protect democracy. And what's more fundamental than the right to vote? And then if we think about the history of the right to vote for black people in the United States, they were lynched and killed for exercising the right to vote. And so what we decided was to do something that had never been done before, which is for blacks in corporate America to stand up and say, we need to fight for the right to vote. And this impacts all Americans. But as black people who are descendants of slaves and people who were lynched and killed trying to exercise the right to vote, we needed to stand up. And we were very encouraged by the coming together of white CEOs who we contacted to say, this is a fundamental issue for America, protecting our democracy. And I will tell you today, I'm very concerned about our democracy. And we felt that the business community needed to take a stand, because one of the things that I believe strongly, and some of this may be, and I think not some of it, and not maybe, it's really because of my upbringing and my experience through my parents, through Bowdoin, through Harvard Law School, through history, is that corporations exist because society allows us to exist. People talk about entitlement programs for individuals. Corporations, we really owe something to society. And what's more important than having a vibrant democracy? So this was something that I want to be very, very clear was not just an effort talking about the right to vote for blacks. It was a right to vote for all Americans. That was the focus.
And for the work that you've been doing, you've taken on the issue of job creation, of wealth creation, employment, particularly for African American men who are among the most underemployed, over-incarcerated. So talk about this campaign, this OneTen initiative that, again, you and Ken Frazier are leading.
So Ken and I think, Ken, it was a day after the murder of George Floyd, we were saying, what is it that we could do? And like a lot of people, we felt helpless. And one of the things I will just say as a side comment, it's really disappointing how the attitude in the country has changed since George Floyd. People said to me, well, how long do you think this is going to last? And I said, unfortunately, I'm very cynical. I don't think it's going to last long.
You think there's a retrenchment?
There is definite retrenchment that is going on, and it's very concerning. But one of the things that, and I should also say Charles Phillips was one of the people that was very involved with Ken and I, Kevin Shearer, who's the former CEO of Amgen, and Ginny Rometty, the former CEO of IBM. And we got together and we said, we really want to do something. And so you talk about a startup within a period of maybe a week or two. We had over 50 companies. I think, Ken, we now have over 72 companies that have made a 10-year commitment to creating 1 million jobs in 10 years for Black Americans who did not go to college, because we thought that was very important. But what was critical, and one of the things that we were very intentional about, is people said, well, why 10 years? Because we said, we got to be persistent. Don't just give us a check for a year and walk away and it's done. You got to make a 10-year commitment to jobs and a 10-year financial commitment. And what we focused on is what we call a skills-first approach, because there is a very significant percentage of jobs, over 60%, 70,000 and above in compensation, that require a 4-year college degree. And in a lot of cases, it doesn't make sense. But here's the other part of it. While this is absolutely geared to 1 million jobs for Black Americans, the point we've also made to companies is, when you take a skills-first approach, you're opening up opportunity for everybody. It's going to benefit everybody. And so in a classic marketing standpoint, the best ideas are when you are concentrated on a particular segment, and then you say, boy, this can benefit the broad population. So this is really a win-win. We're in the early innings of this. I think Ken and I would say this is probably one of the most important thing we've ever done. Because this is about making a meaningful difference in the lives of people, because we want to get these people into family-sustaining jobs. So not dead-end jobs, family-sustaining jobs. And you think about the benefits to the individual, but the benefits to society are very substantial.
Absolutely. So many people, when your name is mentioned, say things like, he should be president. And I know that I know for a fact that there has been more than one president who has wanted you to join his cabinet. So here is your opportunity to respond publicly to your beloved Bowdoin community.
No, I am.
Is there a chance,
No.
Kathy? Is there a chance?
Kathy will tell you absolutely no chance. And I would say, and I would say in all seriousness, I really think it would be really good to get some people who were a lot younger.
So we're going to wrap, but I want you, because another thing people always say about you is that you are perennially optimistic. How do we today, when on any given day it is easy to be depressed, dejected, disgusted by what we see, how does Ken Chenault find hope? And are you hopeful today?
So Darren, what I would say, and you know my mantra, that I really try to think about every day, and that is that the role of a leader is to define reality and give hope. You've got to do both. And the person who I paraphrase that quote from is Napoleon, and so I don't want to wind up like Napoleon, but I frankly think that it's the simplest definition of leadership that I know about, because it's sometimes very hard to define reality. It's frightening to deal with the reality. And I would say, you know this, Ryan, Darren, is I'm writing a book, and it's not just going to be about my life, but I want to talk about America, and I want to talk about leadership, and I want to talk about the importance of values. And one of the things that I'm really concerned about as I look at the political leadership in this country is there's not the focus on values and character. And people have said, look, politicians have always acted in certain ways. That's true, but at least they were embarrassed. At least they knew there was a standard that needed to be met. So I think I'm very concerned about the division in this country. I think people have lost sight of what America really stands for. And that's concerning. I think the fraudsters who talk about they are truly focused on make America great again, I'm not going to get political, but give me a break. They don't represent what this country is about. So I could go through a litany of all the reasons why I have concerns. But I think about the different periods that this country has gone through, and then frankly, making it very personal, I think about my life as a Black American. And I think about my family as I've gone back and identified the slavery records and in fact saw what was my ancestors and what they went through. But I also, when we were doing the voting rights work, I found that I'm a direct descendant. I'm not going to go back all the way because I got to save some stuff for the book. But one of my relatives was a person by the name of Thomas Miller, who was a congressman during Reconstruction for a year. And one of the speeches he gave was on voting rights. and the importance of voting rights for black people. And, you know, I think about the trials and tribulations, not only that black Americans have gone through, but all types of people in this country. And you got to keep on keeping on. You gotta say, we're going to be able to overcome those challenges. And I believe that you can't allow the challenges to make you freeze. And I think individuals really do make a difference. And I take hope from people from all walks of life who really make a difference. I mean, I would say at the company that I was CEO for 17 years, say there's probably 50% of the people probably voted for Trump. But at the end of the day, they really did believe in me and the company. And so the question is, can you touch people and say, wake up, wake up? You know, and my editorial comment would be, for anyone in this audience, do not use the term woke. That things, because at the end of the day, it's wrong. It's a smear. It connotes, I'm not interested in progress in this country. And yeah, you can call people that you don't agree with, that's fine, but don't smear them with a label. And I just think that individuals are going to emerge, and I look at the odds, right, of a slave, of a descendant of a slave, reaching the position that I've reached. The odds were totally against it, totally against it. And yet, I believe our ancestors ultimately were hopeful. But at the end of the day, you got to be realistic. And so I'm going to fight those challenges because that's the reality. The reality is very, very tough. But I think we're going to persevere.
Join me in thanking Ken Chenault.
Thank you. Thank you, Darren.
Thank you, Darren. Thank you, Ken. To say that that was terrific does not do it justice. It is now my long-awaited honor to have Ken join Scott Perper, our board chair, and me, to present you, Ken, with the college's highest honor. And it reads, the Bowdoin Prize presented to Kenneth I. Chenault, class of 1973, magna cum laude, LLD 1996, overseer emeritus. One of the nation's greatest business leaders who has shown throughout his life an unwavering commitment to improve the lives of others, a native of Mineola, New York, a prominent and active member of the campus community and the Afro-American Society, whose senior honors thesis on the history of black men at the college, written with characteristic clarity and honesty, continues to inform and inspire. A graduate of the Harvard Law School in 1976 and a lawyer and business consultant before joining American Express in 1981, where his visionary leadership, business acumen, and integrity brought promotion to Chief Operating Officer and President in 1997, and appointment as Chief Executive Officer and Chairman in 2001. A principled leader whose calm, decisive, and compassionate actions in the wake of September 11, 2001, which took the lives of American Express employees and severely damaged the company's headquarters directly across the street from the World Trade Center, gave reassurance and hope first to a city, a nation, and an international business community in crisis, and subsequently through economic downturns and political turmoil in the next 17 years at American Express. An engaged citizen and champion for civil rights whose voice of wisdom, experience, and conscience has echoed in the corporate boardrooms of IBM, Procter & Gamble, Berkshire Hathaway, and Airbnb, and in governance meetings at Bowdoin College, the Harvard Corporation, the NCAA, and the National Museum of African American History and Culture, as a commencement speaker in colleges and universities, and in public appeals to business leaders to safeguard the rights of all Americans. In a tribute to a Bowdoin son whose service to the common good is an enduring legacy that has continued to improve the lives of others, a profound and grateful college presents to Kenneth Irvin Chenault this, its highest honor.
Thank you very much, Scott. Thank you, Clayton. Thank you to the Board of Trustees. One of the things I will just say that Clayton has been a terrific president for Bowdoin, and I have enjoyed every conversation, and I look forward, Clayton, to continuing our very strong relationship. You've heard enough from me, but I thought I would just make a few points and obviously recognize some people. First and foremost, my wife, Kathy, who's my life partner. Very fortunate to have our two sons, Kenneth and Kevin, who are actually both getting married next year. So we're excited about that. And I want to just recognize a few people from my Bowdoin experience. One is, as I mentioned earlier, is Peter Curran, who was just an incredible mentor and friend, and someone who my father had really a terrific saying: if you're going to be for me early. Peter was for me early, when there wasn't as much evidence as there is now that I was some person that you should invest the time in. And then there were three professors at Bowdoin that were instrumental in my academic career and were people that I stayed close to. One left too early, a person by the name of Jim Bland, who was absolutely fantastic. Dan Levine, both of them were in American history, and then one of my favorite professors for European history was Jonathan Carl. Those are just three people who really had a major impact on me. And then I want to acknowledge my black colleagues at Bowdoin, because we were pioneers. And it was a special bond that we forged. And I really did value the sense of community and the relationship. And then I would also thank the students of Bowdoin at the time. I found Bowdoin to be a really open environment, and one where we could engage in constructive confrontation. And it's been nice to receive notes from people along the way. And I would say the last thing for me that's most important from a leadership standpoint is that I believe that the most important legacy you can have is to make a meaningful difference in people's lives. And that's what I've tried to do, and that's what I will continue to do. So thank you for this incredible honor.
The only thing I'm going to say, Ken, yes?
The impromptu, one thing which I did want to address. This is, I believe, when you got something to say, you say it. I really commend Clayton for talking about the full history of Bowdoin College. And I think what's important about the message is that there are some people in this country that are saying we shouldn't really teach that history because it's going to make people feel bad. That is an assault on our morality as a people. And the pervasiveness of slavery and the impact of slavery is still being felt. And I think what is important for everyone to have some redemption is to acknowledge what happened, to talk about the truth. Truth, that's the oxygen of a healthy society, of a democracy. But what's also important is to recognize the aspirations that this country has. And so the reality is that the forefathers of this country, many of them were slaveholders. But here's what we all have to remember, is the words of that Constitution. Even though I was not considered to be part of the Constitution, those are mine. Yes. No one's taken those from me. Thank you.